Shavua Tov, hope all of you are doing well. Tonight we're going to be learning Maseches like Kattan, Daf Yud. In Yirtzeh Hashem, we'll learn a quick block tonight. We're going to be starting at the very top of Yud Amud Aleph and going about 6, 7, 8 lines from the bottom of the page, and then we'll pick up again in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow with yet another daf. Our Mishnah had said that on Chol Moed one is allowed to do some types of stitching. So let's discuss what is intended by that. The Mishnah writes, Hahedyot tofer kedarko. If you have someone who's a hedyot, they're a simple person. They're not really trained. They don't really know what they're doing. So then they can just stitch like a normal person. There's no problem. They can just stitch as whatever their level of skill is. They can stitch. How do we do that? Heichidami hedyot. So what's the definition of a hedyot? Amr de Rav Yanai kol she'enu yachol lahotzi melo machad bevas achas, that are not able to pull off a little trick. Basically, what they do is they'd fold a garment over many times over and stick one needle through all of them, and then when they pull them out, the stitches would come out perfectly aligned. So that's a chachma. That's the skill. That's the minimum threshold. That would be the final exam to make you from a hedyot into an uman. So that's the sheet that the Brisa says in the name of Rav Yanai, not the Brisa, but they say in the name of Rav Yanai. Rav Yosef, Rav Chanina, Amar Kol She'enu Yachal L'Chavin Imra B'Chefas Chaluko. If you can't make a straight hem at the bottom of the pants, then that's the line in the sand. So different lines in the sand. Everybody else who's an expert, so they're limited, and they have to do something a little different. What do they do? So the Gemara says, quoting the Mishnah, Uman Machlif. So Uman should do something that's machlif from the word kelev. So there's two different things about a kelev, two machlokes at least, about two versions of what a kelev might be comparable to as it relates to stitching. How could a dog be related to stitching? Let's see. My machlev, Rav Yochanan Amar mafsia, that they should be spaced out. The stitching has to be spaced out in a way like dogs' teeth are spaced out. That's what Rashi says. And Rabbi Bar Shmuel Amar Shine Kalbasa, has to be like the teeth of dogs, but in a different way, not in its spacing, but in the fact that they're jagged, that some are shorter, some are longer. So he has to make the stitches jagged. Says the Gemara, this will carry us for until the Mishnah. Our Mishnah, it said, Misargan es hamitos. We don't know what Misargan es hamitos is, so we have to spend some time discussing it right now. So let's see what Misargan is. My Misargan my Mematchen. Our Mishnah had said that there were two different categories of dealing with beds. One is Misargan and one is Mematchen. So here's approach number one. We'll soon see that this won't work, but here's approach number one. Kias of Ravdimi, Omar, Pligi bar Rabchia bar Abba, bar Rabchia bar Abba Barabasi. There's a machlokas from Eretz Yisrael. He came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. And he said there's a machlokas between two Amoraim, V'tarvaihu, Mishmei Dechizki of Rabbi Yochanan. Each of them were speaking on behalf of others because they didn't really know. They were learning, they were just quoting. So then the Gemara says what their sheet is. Chad Amar one says, Mesargin is Shasi V'erev, Umemaschen is Shasi below Erev. The Mesargin is Shasi V'erev. Shasi V'erev in general means when you have one thing going this way, and then you have another thing going this way. So it's crisscross. It's x-axis and y-axis. It looks like a oversized tic-tac-toe board. What are we talking about here? We're talking about their beds. So under our beds, typically, we either have a box spring or we have these pieces of wood slats that support the mattress. They didn't have that. So what they did is they would take a rope, they'd tie it on the end of a bedpost, and then they'd run the rope back and forth over the bed frame in one direction. And then when they were done, they'd go the length of the bed back and forth. So Shasi V'erev is going right to left and back to front, the width of the bed, as well as the length of the bed. So when you're done, it looks like a grid of many boxes. That is what the Mishnah writes. That's what the Gemara writes is Mesargin. That's Shita number one. But the other Shita is that Memaschen, the other word I should say, Memaschen, to stretch, it means, says the Gemara, that Memaschen is Shesi below Arab. It's only in one direction, but it's not two. So it makes lines when they're tightening the bed, when they're making the ropes, but it doesn't make boxes, only one direction. So that's one of the shitas. Misargin Shesi below Arab. Some say no, Misargin is a lesser level. We had the initial shita said that Misargin was crisscrossed, and here Misargin is Shesi below Arab. That's only one direction. Memaschen isn't this at all. Memaschen means something else. It means what we thought it meant, which is to tighten. Shim haya rafui memascho, that if the straps start to sag a little bit on the bed, so you can take one of the ropes and pull it really tight, and then all of the other ones will tighten because of that. That's what the shitas are. So that's machlokas between these two. Well, again, one says Mesargin is Shesi V'erev, the other says it's only Shesi and not Erev. One says Memaschen is Shesi V'erev, and the other says that it's neither, it's just pulling. It says the Gemara, how can that be quarter of the way down? Eini, is that true? It's the Gemara says that in regards to this machlokas, that everyone agrees that you're not allowed to be mafshilin. You can't take the thinner strands of rope, the threads, and turn them into a rope. That you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to do that lichatchila. So this is going to generate a question for us. I understand the shita that says that we're allowed to be misargin, that we're allowed to make a bed shesi ve'erev. You can make the crisscrossing of the ropes, which will go under the mattress. And mamaschin means that you can do shesi below erev, and that means that you're allowed to do one direction. And that then explains as to how it could be that everyone would agree that you're not allowed to make ropes. But to say that you're not allowed to make ropes doesn't work according to the second opinion. So according to the one who says that misargin is shesi below erev, that it's only one direction, and memaschin is sheim hayarafui hayimamascho, that you can tighten it. So says the Gemara, hashta, now that you hold that shesi ve'erev amrislo, that you're not allowed to do shesi ve'erev, chavalam lechatchila miboya. All the more so that one is not allowed to do chavalam lechatchila, you're not allowed to make ropes. And if that's true, we don't understand that second shita. So says the Gemara, kasha, that's a very good question, and the Gemara doesn't present an answer. And here is another question that's posed. Amar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak bar Chia bar Ovid. That second shita that we learned, which anyways is difficult. Is there also such a shita bichlal that we would say that there's such a thing as shesi below arev? How can that be? After all, Rav Meir Omer that hamita, that in order for a bed to become subject to tumah, it has to be mishiyisrog bash lo shabatim. There have to be 3 squares that are made by the ropes. What does that teach you about making ropes? Is that it's always with boxes, which means that it's shesi ve'erev and not shesi below erev. It's never going to be one direction. It's always going to be 2 directions. So how can you say that there's such a thing as shesi below erev as it relates to tying beds? It's not correct. Ella says the Gemara, you're right, halfway down on Yudam and Aleph, it has to be different. Everyone agrees that when our Mishnah says misargin, that it's talking about shesi, ve'erev is talking about both. Nobody argues about that. Their only argument is in regards to what memaschin means. Marsavar memaschin shesi below erev. The memaschin means only one direction of making the bed with the ropes under the mattress. So marsavar shim hayarafui mematcho, and the other shita says that it's nothing to do with tying the ropes. It has to do simply with tightening the ropes. Meisvei asks the Gemara, hang on one second. Misargin es hamita. We have a brisa that says that you're misargin es hamita ve'ein sarach lomar shim ematchen tiver Reb Meir. Reb Meir was of the opinion that you're allowed to be misargin, and you're all the more so allowed to be memaschin, which was much less of a tirchan cholamoy. Rabbi Yossi Omer memaschin avalo misargin. He says you are allowed to do stretching. You can pull the rope tight, but you're not allowed to do misargin. Yesh Omrim, and according to some, ein memaschin kol ikar. And some say, no, you're not allowed to do it at all. In the name of Rabbi Yossi, that you're not allowed to do the memaschin at all. You can't even tighten the ropes. So says the Gemara, this only works according to one of the opinions that we saw. I understand the shita that says that memaschin means that there's one direction of ropes and not 2. This is how you could have a yesh omrim that would say that no, you're not allowed to do this at all. But according to the one who says that if it's loose, you're allowed to tighten it, the yesh omrim memascho namilo. That the yesh omrim seems to be saying the same exact thing as the primary shita. So how then can you have an answer? Says the Gemara, we are able to answer this. B'mane lo tarchina. There is a shita that says that you're not allowed to tighten it, and instead what you need to do is where the ropes are sagging, you put clothes. If the ropes are sagging like this, you take some clothes and layer it on top to make the mattress lay more flat. And that brings us to the next Mishnah, 3/4 of the way down on Yudam and Aleph. Let's continue. We are allowed on Chol HaMoed, Mamid and Taner v'Kiraim v'Rechaim b'Moed. You're allowed to an oven and a stove, and a Rechaim is a grind, a grind or a millstone b'Moed. That's all allowed. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion, Omer ein mechabshin es harechaim betchila, but you're not allowed to be mechabesh the millstone lechatchila. We don't even know what that means. So for that, we need the Gemara. What does the Gemara say? My mechabshin. When Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah says that you're not allowed to be mechabesh the millstone, what does it mean? So Rabbi Yehuda Amar menaker re chaya. It means that you're going to cut grooves in it on the side. It helped for the grinding. They would cut grooves if there was like a larger bowl and the grind would be on the inside. So they'd make grooves so that the grains could grind a little bit better. Rabbi Chiel Omer, no, bas eina, it was actually a bas eina, an eye, or an opening at the top where you could pour grain into. Says the Gemara, one of these shitas does not make sense. What shita is that? Let's see, Meisvei, 15 lines from the bottom. Amid and Taner v'Kiraim b'Moed. one is allowed to make an oven and a stove on a moed. You can make it, but you can't actually makiv patish, like really finalize the product. That's not allowed. You could even finish it. It's not a problem at all. You are good to go. Says the Gemara, continuing in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishmo, Ma'amidin, he says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Ma'amidin es hachadasha, u'mechab shen es hayeshana, that you are allowed to set up the chadasha, and it uses our word again of mechab shen es hayeshana. Now we had said two options for mechab shen. Bishlam alaman omer mechab shen menake rechaya. I understand if you want to say that mechabshin is making grooves. Yeah, over time they begin. It's made out of stone. So over time, the grooves that you make to help the grains grind, it wears down after time. So that's why a very old millstone will need to have new grooves that are going to be etched into the stone. According to the one who says that mechabshin in our Mishnah means to make a hole to pour the grain, and that doesn't make sense, because how can it be that you have a very old millstone that never had something to pour the grains into from the start? That doesn't make sense. You're missing a critical part of the construction. Says the Gemara, Yeshana baseina lamala. Why would that ever be the case? Answers the Gemara, no, there is a case where a Yeshana would need to have a hole placed in the top of it to add grains, not to put one there in the first place. But as the Gemara says on the last short line, 5 lines from the bottom, you made it the diameter of the initial hole to pour the grains in 1 inch, and now you have a bigger business. You don't want to put in so slowly. You want it to be 3 inches, so you take something and you scrape out the edges until it goes from 1 inch to 3 inches. That can happen with the Yeshana. So in other words, both of the options in the Gemara have been substantiated. Rav Huna, story time. Rav Huna shami lehu gavra de kamenake rechai b'chula de moada. Rav Huna heard the scraping sound of someone etching out some of the stone in order to make the grooves in the rechai and the millstone, and it was b'chula de moada, and it was on Chol HaMoed. He was very upset about this, and he said, "Omar, mine high. What is going on here? Who could do such a thing? Ischel gufei de kamechel chola de moada." The person's body who's doing this should become profaned. It should become, it's a very difficult word to translate literally. Rashi translated as Yischal el Gufo. His body should have a hole in it, literally speaking, because the Kamachel Chola Demoda, he's violating halacha. So that clearly shows you which opinion he was of, the opinion, which is Savar Laki Yesh Omrim, that Ein Mechabshin Kol Ikar, that we are not allowed to do any of this at all. You're not allowed to do any etching whatsoever. According to others, however, of course, you are allowed to be menaker. You are allowed to do this etching. You're allowed to scrape the hoof of an animal if it's having some type of discomfort. That is no problem at all. That's what Rashi says on the bottom. Rashi says, mutar litol lehen tzipornaim kedach shosanach l'susim shalanu. De'ilo avid lehachi havelei tzara v'lo motziazu. If in fact you have this problem, then you're allowed to fix it, because it could lead to an animal that's going to be uncomfortable. If they don't have their normal routine maintenance, then that can be a problem. Maybe one can be medayik from here, that if it's time to take an oil change, it happens to fall out now and you didn't think about it before. I don't know. We have to ask modern poskim how that works out. But for your mode of transportation, you're allowed to take care of their needs as well to make sure that they're still functioning. Let's continue on the top of Yudam and Beis. We're going to learn a smattering of halachos that relate to the world of Chol HaMoed. Aval, continuing on the same thing, Chamra de Rechaya lo. They used to have a chamor that was tethered to the Rechaya. They would pull the millstone, so all the grinding would be done automatically, as it were, by the donkey. So that animal, you're not allowed to take care of its hoof. Rashi, why not? Shekach osin. That's how they used to run the mills. So there, lo matzi lemishkal le'ahu chamatzi pornav. There, you're not allowed to cut his nails. The lo, or I should say his hooves, or whatever the anatomy is called. The lo matzi lemitchan b'moed ala letzarach moed. That should be a rarity that you are doing any tochen during the moed. Typically, we do that beforehand. For the mefarish lekaman beperek mishapach hilkach tchina mu'etes yachol litchon bechamor below merei le gidol tzipornav. It's just a small amount of grinding, and even if you were to need a during Chol HaMoed, which you probably won't find. So he's going to take 15, 20 steps. That's not a long distance, and therefore you can't cut his nails. Back in the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Shar the Mishkal Tufrei L'Chamer Derechaya. He disagrees. He says you are allowed to cut the nails or the hoof of an animal that is pulling the millstone. Ulu okume rechaya, ulu mivne rechaya, ulu mivne amas rechaya, ulu mivne uraya. All the building aspects of making a rechayim, all of those things he allows on Chol HaMoed. Rav Ashar l'sruke susya. He allows the brushing of the mane of an animal, of a horse. That's totally fine. Ulu mivne akrapita or mivne itztiba, to make a barn and to make a bench, all of those are fine on Chol HaMoed. Rav Ashar the mishkal dama lebehema b'chol moada. He says it's permissible for one to do hakazas dam, to do bloodletting on animals. Amar le Abaye Tanya de Misayelach. You have a brisa that supports this idea of allowing hakazas dam for animals on Chol HaMoed. Makizin dam lebehema ve'in mona and refuah lebehema b'chulo shamoed. Not only hakazas dam, but anything that they're going to need for refuah, they are allowed to be taken care of. Rav Ashar le kiskuse kirme. One is allowed to do like ironing or pressing of some kind of garments during Chol HaMoed. My taima. Why is that? Maseches yotu. I don't think this plays out in the poskim with ironing our shirts. I think we're pretty makbid about it. Ask your local Orthodox rabbi. Amar Rav Yitzchak Barami, Amar Rav Chizda kiture bire. Adding sleeves onto a garment, asir. That's not allowed. My taima, my seumanu. There are sometimes in the custom suits world, they take your suits and they rotate the cuff to sit just the way your body said. That's my suma. That's not a normal thing. So to add a sleeve is very complicated, and therefore we're not allowed to do it in Chol HaMoed. Amar Rav, man de maskil arab. Somebody wants to remove all of the things that are on their ground, they're allowed to under certain circumstances. Adai to the beidari, if you wanted just to make a clean area so you can do things on Chol HaMoed, that's fine. Shari, adaita da'ara, if you're trying to really just improve the grass, improve the yard, that's not allowed. That's asir. Heichidami, how do we distinguish? Well, it's pretty simple. If mulya b'mulya, if you're making piles of things, v'natza, you're digging and making mounds, you're digging and making holes. So then that's obviously not for the sake of taking care of the ground. That's clearly adaita to beidari. You're doing something with a specific purpose in mind that isn't improving your yard, because this certainly isn't improving your yard. Shakal mulya v'shadavanatza, if in every hole you then take a scoop of dirt and put it in there, that sounds like you're working on the ground, and therefore adai to da'ara, and that's not allowed. Similar structure of Gemara, v'amar Rava, hayman de zachi zichya. A person who wants to remove branches, he wants to clean branches from the ground, from their yard. Let's see how that plays out. Adaite sive. If you're doing it because you need the firewood, no problem. Shari. Adaite da'ara, but if it's to benefit the ground, you're not allowed. Heichidami. How do we distinguish what a person's motivations are? So it says the Gemara, Shakil Rav Reve B'Shavik Zutre. If you pick up the big branches and you leave the little twigs, it's very clear that it's adaite sive. There you clearly want the firewood. Shakal Rav Reve Vezutre. If you're picking up all of the firewood, that was not normal. People who wanted firewood wouldn't take the little twigs. They knew it only lasted a few seconds. And therefore, if you picked up even the little twigs, it was obvious that was adaite da'ara. We're halfway down in Yudam Beis. Let's continue. If a person wants to let a little bit of water into their yard, they must have had some type of dam that was accessible to the body of water. Let's say there was some type of river running behind them, and if you lift up a door trap, so some of the water could come into your yard. So it says the Gemara, it depends. Adaite de kavre, if you're doing it to capture fish, as fish in the pond, sure, no problem. Shari. Adaita da'ara, if you're doing it to water your ground, water the grass, that's not allowed. Asir. Heichidami, how do we know? So it used to be that there was a two-stage operation of this door. It would open a little bit and then it would open a lot. Pasach trebave chad me'iloi v'chad mitatoi adaita dekavre. If you open both the upper and lower parts of the gates, so then clearly that was for the fish. But pasach chad bava, if you only opened one of the gates, so then says the Gemara, daita da'ara, that would imply that you're only doing it for the sake of watering your grass, and that's not allowed. V'amarava haiman de pashach dikla. There's a person who's trimming the trees of a palm tree. If it's a daita de chivsa, if he had an actual purpose of using that for himself, he's using it for some purpose for yantiv, that's shari, that's permissible, no problem at all. However, if it's a daita de dikla, if it was going to be for the sake of pruning the tree, that's not allowed. Asir heichitami, how do we know? Shakal kulim echad gisa daita de chivsa. If you did it only from one side, then we knew it was for the purposes that you had initially intended, and no problem at all. High gisa ume high gisa, but if you're trimming evenly from the trees, that seems to imply that it's a daita de dikla v'asir. That's not allowed. V'amar Rava, another din. Hani Tanre Tuchlani, if you have some unripe dates. So if Migzarinu, you're cutting them with a knife, Shari, that's totally fine. If Maitzinu, you're just putting it in your mouth and biting it, then Asr, that's not allowed. Rav Papa Amar Kevan de Misloi, since they can become wormy, so therefore Kiprak Matya Ha'aved, I mean, it's like losing the opportunities for business, or you're losing your merchandise, and therefore Bishari. The Amar Rabba teaches us a general rule, Prakmacha Kol Shehu Asr. In general, we don't allow for that at all. However, Amar Rav Yossi Bar Avinu Davar Ha'aved Mutter. This is the qualification that we have in Shulchan Aruch. That when we have a scenario that's a Davar Ha'aved on Chol HaMoed, we are absolutely allowed to do that. And we're going to just learn one story here, and then we're going to stop. Last story for the day. Ravina Havale Hahu Iskadu Mizdaban Bushisa Alpe. He had a deal. It was going to get 6,000 rubles, 6,000 zuzim in one transaction. Pretty profitable. However, he didn't want to do that. He wanted to avoid it, seemingly a chumrah, because halacha l'maaseh you should be allowed to do such a thing. And Shahya, he waited, Lizvune Basar Chula de Moada, and he wanted to wait. And he was paid back manyfold or twofold. Says the Gemara, Vizavne betresar alpe. When the time finally came to sell, he managed to sell it for double, for 12,000. So he was very makbid on treating Chol HaMoed with the appropriate respect. We're going to stop right here. Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow. I'm not exactly sure when yet. I'll let you know. Wishing you all a beautiful night, a gitavach, and looking forward to seeing you all back in person shortly. Have a wonderful night.